some point on the spiritual awakening and ascension journey, you are going to want to shake things up, to change something. You might even be stuck in a routine, having this gnawing feeling like I should really get out more, or I should really take up that class, go to a retreat that I've always been thinking about doing. This is the universe's way and your higher self's way of nudging you into stepping outside of your comfort zone. Because there's something that happens as we age. Babies come out of the womb completely flexible. You can bend their legs all the way back. They don't have kneecaps. And they're very delicate, very gentle. They don't move a lot. But when they become children, they're still incredibly flexible. And they move so much. Then, as we start to age, over time and over many, many years, we stop moving in so many directions. We stop being omnidirectional, being able to pivot on a dime or shift our weight and change directions. We pretty much have two settings, forwards and backwards, maybe side to side. But even then, side to side leaves us, as we can only go forwards and backwards, and our joints and our muscles and our fascia get so stiff that eventually we have one movement, and that is forward, before we are bedridden again, barely able to move at all. And similarly, what happens in our mind is that we demonstrate this ferocious focus as the neurotransmitters, if you still believe in traditional neuroscience, create pathways that become deeply ingrained in our brains over time. We become less plastic. And children can absorb so much, and they're very, very malleable. But as we put on the decades, we know what we like, we are what we think, and our reality is a byproduct of how we behave, which is a culmination of all of those thought loops, beliefs, mindsets, things of that nature. So now when we have those gnawing feelings to break out of our routine, it's usually because we feel a sense of stagnation brewing under the surface, or we just have this inkling, curiosity, or drive to change it up. This is the universe's way of helping us to be back in movement, to be back in flow, and to push the boundaries of our previous constructs of identity and routine. Perhaps it's about traveling to a new country or new culture, doing something that's always been on our bucket list, but we've never had the time, the energy, or the finances to do. And all of a sudden we wake up and we just know it's time. What's magical about this is energy, just like emotions, likes to move and move through our physical form. In fact, the universe itself is always in motion, if you believe traditional classic physics, that is. And as a result, the expression of life and chi or prana, depending on your inclination, yes, it likes to be held within a vessel, but it likes to move through us, discharge, recharge, and sometimes, depending on if we still have any scarcity mindset or circumstances produce a inclination for saving versus spending, this can also result in stagnation of our lives because we will hold on to money instead of spending it. Money is energy, which also likes to be in flow. You give and you receive. You give and you receive. And what I've found is that a lot of the money mindsets are about breaking the notion that it is such a sacred resource that you have to hoard it. And when you embrace the flow and the energy of money and the vibration of it, it's almost effortless to dance with it. And you start to see how when you spend or give, it has a ripple effect on the people that you're spending on or that you're giving to. And then it creates this reciprocity that's a very unique experience versus being in perpetual debt, perpetual fear, or perpetual hoarding or miserly activities. And similarly, the energy of our bodies likes to flow, just like emotions. And where a lot of people, especially in my client work, have to remap their experience in this human form is understanding that their emotional experience is very powerful and energetically is like water. The more you try to dam it, the more force behind it builds and builds and builds until it finally explodes. Whereas if you let the stream of your emotions constantly run and discharge and recharge and let it flow in and out of your being, it doesn't cause sickness or harm in the same way as pretending that you don't have any feelings and then sideswiping somebody on the road because you just lose it one day. Motion and movement allows for the lack of resistance. That is why it is such a powerful state of being. People talk about being in flow. It's no different. Allowing energy to come through us, allowing sickness to come through us. If it happens to be at our doorstep and not resisting it, forcing the body to ignore it and deny it until you're practically bedridden, but to honor it as part of your sacred experience and to let it move through you without harboring resentment or regret because you're sidelined for a little bit. And you happen to be subscribed to the busy body model of living in reality, where much of your value and entertainment is tied up in the number of things that you accomplish on a day-to-day basis. So for you, sitting still for a day or two is really a heavy experience compared to most people. People like this struggle with weakness and sickness and rest, almost as though the sheer need of taking rest hints at some vulnerability that they have, perhaps adjusting their own perception of what it means to be human or superhuman, because they often are very superhuman. And so when we allow these experiences to flow through us, we allow for the reduction of resistance. We take stagnation, which has its place. I have episodes devoted to resting and stagnating and going through a metaphorical and actually symbolically literal death experience through stagnation and rest has its place and its time. But if we are not careful, then we can become so rigid, like our bones and our mindset and our joints as we age, that we lose sight of the fact that we're still supposed to discover and play and have adventures and fun and to push ourselves in new and interesting ways, to expand the boundaries, what we consider ourselves to be or to not be in many cases. And movement is a powerful way of breaking off any stagnant energies. Stretching, yoga, qigong, these are all tools, practices for moving the body, but there's so many more. Just walking, hiking, driving. Sometimes the literal act of moving without a destination, without a plan, can do wonders for breaking the mind out of the thought loops that have it perplexed and tied to a negative emotional experience. And sometimes all it takes is taking a day trip out to the mountains, going out in nature on a fresh hike that you've never been to before. And notice how you solve problems or find peace that couldn't be solved or found if you were to just be in your normal Saturday routine, going through the same motions, the same loops, the same everything. And yes, as spiritual creatures, we have our rituals and we have our practices, but even these can be devoid of intentional meaning sometimes when we get very habitual. It's the mind's nature to become distracted, to get into a rhythm and a series of actions, and to mail it in. We actually have, again, if you believe in the traditional view of neuroscience, brain regions dedicated to something called procedural memory in the striatum. And it's a deep in the mid part of the brain. And essentially, what this does, in addition to other parts of your brain, I'm not going to go into all of it, it allows you to do things on autopilot, which is why you are an expert driver or a bike rider or a walker, and you can be completely immersed in a conversation with somebody else, and you still can navigate obstacles and prevent cataclysmic failures from occurring on just a second's notice, unless you happen to be impaired or having an off day or completely blindsided, which happens sometimes. So we have functions in our brain actually dedicated to taking rituals and making them second nature without needing to think about it, without needing to rehearse it, but to just simply do it. Sometimes, if we're not careful, we can end up slipping away and lacking a sort of presence that we did when we first started that particular prayer or mantra or practice. And the essence of our spirituality, the consciousness and the energy imbued in that sacred act in the beginning is suddenly less potent over time because of our tendency to habitualize things. So breaking out of routine, getting into a different movement can help to reorient you. This is why contrast experiences are so powerful and illuminating that which we really want, because it shows us what we have, what we don't have, and reveals to us what we really deeply desire. And it shakes us out of complacency when we have these challenges. Also, it shakes us out of any sort of non-gratitude that we might be facing, as we realize we might be pretty lucky after all. The act of healing requires movement of your cells. Again, if you believe in traditional classic biology and cell biology, the movement of your cells, the transport of proteins and specialized immune modulating signaling, and it's a whole host. It's got its own section of biology. Immunology is its own beast in of itself. Everything is moving when you're healing, even though you might be still. Inside your body, there are so many cellular cascades that are firing off without your knowledge, without your consent, in order to bring healing to whatever needs to be healed. It's miraculous, actually. It really is. The act of rest appears to be just laying down, but actually your body is quite busy. And when you are activating the parasympathetic nervous system through rest, you allow for things to happen underneath your hood that you can't readily access if you're up moving around, taking care of all of the zillion things that you normally do that day. And so on the surface, it appears that we might be immobilized or lazy, but actually inside, there are so many processes which are occurring that even healing itself is a very, very busy activity. But it is the mind's role to judge ourselves as we engage in things like rest or healing activities, and even falling flat on our face when we try something new and we feel a little discouraged, or perhaps our ego is a little bruised. But when we take on the beginner's mindset, we allow ourselves the humor to laugh and to remember what it was like to be completely green and naive at something. And it is through movement that allows us to embrace change and move from one state of being to another, move from one consciousness perspective to a more expanded one. And Ascension is all about movement. Even if you take periods of rest, stagnation, go through a death, you are moving through dimensions. You are moving through constructs of belief systems. You are moving through relationships. You are moving through lifelines. It is a very demanding process that requires much movement, sometimes literal movement around the world as you hit upon certain ascension ley lines to activate you in key ways or to shift you into different portals. So trust those inclinations, trust those calls, because there could be something very important for you to expand your horizons.